Good evening, everyone. All right, we're switching into Vacation Bible School mode. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's so good to see you. Welcome to Trinity Cathedral. I am Bishop Jennifer Reddall, Bishop of the Diocese of Arizona, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight to hear some words and wisdom from the Reverend Jim Wallis. I want to do a couple introductions and a couple housekeeping things. So first of all, this event tonight is co-sponsored by the African American Christian Clergy Coalition, and Pastor Barnwell is here and others representing them. Thank you for your presence here. And co-sponsored by the Arizona Democracy Resilience Network, and Don Henninger, one of their co-chairs, is here, along with other leaders from ADRN. And the Arizona Faith Network with Katie Sexton and others. And we're all here tonight because somewhere in our heart we have an understanding that our vote is an act of loving our neighbor. And so we're here to reflect on that with a great leader and with one another. Housekeeping issues. So, there are no restrooms in this part of the cathedral because we were built at a different time. But if you go out that door and into the Olney Gallery, you will find restrooms there and someone to help you figure out where those restrooms are in the Olney Gallery. After tonight's event, we'll have a reception in the Olney Gallery. Reverend Wallis will be there to do book signings. We have copies of his most recent book for purchase. So if you forgot to bring a book for him to sign, we've got you covered. For those who don't know him, Reverend Wallis is a teacher, preacher, writer, and advocate, and currently holds the chair of justice at Georgetown University, where he's the director of the Georgetown University Center on Faith and Justice. And I first encountered his wisdom in Sojourners magazine and in the 2006 book, God's Politics, Why the Right Gets It Wrong and the Left Doesn't Get It. And when I read that in 2006, I had no idea of where we were going. But I've been consistently inspired by his continued writing and actions, culminating in his most recent book, the one that's available for purchase, The False White Gospel: Rejecting Christian Nationalism, Reclaiming True Faith, and Refounding Democracy. And you can also catch him on his bi-weekly podcast, The Soul of the Nation. So, Reverend Wallis, it's an honor and a privilege to have you, and we look forward to hearing from you tonight. Just gonna make sure you can get up.
Good evening. It is really good to see you all here on a Thursday night. So I had dinner with all those names of people and organizations that were just named. And I want to thank all of them, these leaders, for sponsoring the night, but also for dinner. Tacos were good. It was good. But what we talked about, this is a moment in the life of this country's church and state. It's a moment. And I want to give special thanks to Bishop Jennifer Reddall and Dr. Warren Stewart, old friend and a new friend. The politics tell me and tell you that Arizona is in play. You hear that, right? I hear there's a candidate down in Tucson, where I just came from today, which shows you're in play. I was just in North Carolina for 4 days and 4 nights. Rural, urban, and I said there, North Carolina is in play. What I want to ask you tonight and talk together about is, how is faith in play in Arizona? Politics is in play, That's for sure. How is faith in play? This is, for me, much more than a book event. I've been having these book events for now 6 months. It's more a town meeting. It's more a conversation about faith and how it's in play. Though I have to be on my toes because sometimes your book's been out for a while, people have read it, and they ask you these questions. And there's a number of authors, I'm sure, in this room, and you get these letters. We've read your book, and could you come talk to us about it? So in a previous book called The Soul of Politics, I got such a letter. It was interesting, though, it was from the inmates at Sing Sing Prison in upstate New York. We've read your book. We want to really talk about it. Could you come? It sounded like that might be quite interesting, so I wrote back to the young brother, and I said, when do you want me to come? He says, well, we're free most nights. We're kind of a captive audience here. And I went and had such a rigorous conversation. Now, in chapter 3, you said this, unpack that. In chapter 4, unpack that. And he said to me, I want you to know, Jim, that almost all of us here at Sing Sing Prison are from 4 or 5 neighborhoods in New York City. Almost all of us. It's like a train comes through neighborhoods like mine. You get out when you're 9 or 10 years old, and the train ends up here at Sing Sing. Powerful metaphor. Here's urban trains coming through only certain zip codes, ending up at the same destinations. But my new friend, now close friend, said, but I've been converted inside these walls. So when I get out, I'm going to go back and stop those trains. Stop those trains. There's a lot of trains running in this nation. And how is our political conversation going to stop those trains or just keep them running? So, Bishop, you raised a question just a few moments ago about our neighbor. So what I want to do, this book really has, it's just 6 iconic biblical texts. That's really what the book is about. 6 texts. All we can ever do in any moment is be faithful to the gospel. Preach it. Try to live it. And know that all we can do is offer our 2 cents, if you will. And we have a God that multiplies the value of our 2 cents. People ask me what's going to happen in this election. I have no idea. I can't predict it. I can't control it. But I can ask myself and ask you, talk to each other about the gospel. What does it say? What does it mean? So let's take what the bishop raised. A lawyer came to see Jesus. Now, in my extensive study of this text in Luke 10, 25, 37, I discovered that it was a Washington lawyer. Because I know that tone of voice. He said to Jesus, so what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said, I think you know. You've read the law. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So he says, okay. He conceded that. But then he said this, who is my neighbor? It wasn't who is my neighbor? How can I help? It was, who exactly do I have obligations to? Who is my neighbor? I think that is the most important question in a democracy. Who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? And so he asks the question, and Jesus comes up with a remarkable response. Jesus chooses someone as the best example of who a neighbor is. And it was a Samaritan. Now, remember, in Judean culture, in Jesus' time, they didn't think there were any good Samaritans. There were no good Samaritans. They're mixed race. Half-breeds, dangerous, false worshipers. Stay away from them. They're dangerous. I mean, we've seen now cartels of Samaritans in Mexico coming with guns and diseases. Oh no, that's a different group, I forgot. But Samaritans were othered like we other people today. They were the others. Samaritans were the others. And the Jewish scholars tell us that the man on the side of the road was a Jew. So here is a man who is othered in his society, stopping to help a man who is other to him. Who is my neighbor? The text suggests that your neighbor probably doesn't live in your neighborhood. He probably doesn't live in your neighborhood. So how do we extend who our neighbor is? I watched a debate the other night, and the moment that was striking for me was when I learned, I emailed all of my siblings, how their pets are very important to them. Their dogs and cats. I said, beware, protect those beloved dogs and cats. Because apparently there are some Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. They're going to steal them and eat them. Brings up the second text. In Matthew 25, Jesus talks about that and says, I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. The word stranger in the text there means immigrant, refugee, asylum seeker. So instead of welcoming the stranger, we were told to beware. And this was for the press just another outlandish lie by someone who is known for outlandish lies. But I thought differently. This wasn't about another lie, it was about who is being lied about the most in this election campaign by that same person who's worried about dogs and cats. Who's being lied about the most are immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers. At the opening of a campaign down a big escalator, it was Mexican immigrants called rapists and criminals. Now it's those all from insane asylums and prisons and gangs. And Jesus says, how you welcome the stranger is how you treat me. That is my conversion text, that Matthew 25 text. It brought me out of the student movement, where I was a secular activist for many years. And I was struck by this text, the Son of Man saying, I was hungry. It was me. I was that mom that worked 2 jobs and still needed food stamps, and they got cut. That was me. I was thirsty. I was that black mother in Flint who couldn't get clean water without lead poisoning for her kids. That was me. I was naked. I was a stranger. I was a farmer in Guatemala, and all this climate change. By the way, it's very hot here. Have you noticed? We talked about that over dinner. It's really hot here. Climate change means he couldn't grow crops anymore on his land, so gathered up all the stuff they could carry, not much, kind of naked, and he was told by soldiers that his boy was needed to be a boy soldier, and if he didn't say yes, his daughter would be gang raped. So he walked so far to America, where he'd be given asylum. And then his kids got put in cages, different than his. I was in Tucson yesterday, and I was given a tour of this place where they bring asylum seekers who've traveled so far, and they've been robbed and ransomed, some raped, some tortured, seeing friends die, and they're welcomed by these Christians. And I saw smiles on the faces of small kids. You know? That's the gospel. And how do we raise the gospel in a time like this? How you welcome the stranger, Jesus says, this is how you welcome me. Now, we can debate policy. Both Democrats and Republicans have completely failed us on our borders for a sane and compassionate immigration policy. That's all true, but still Jesus says, yeah, but how you treat the stranger is how you treat me. In John 8, Jesus says, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Well, I went deeper into that text, and you know, I learned that the opposite of truth isn't just lies, it's captivity. Truth and freedom are indivisible. And a whole lot of people in this country, I'm going to say, as I'm one of them, a whole lot of white people are captive to lies. So it's deeper than you're wrong and I'm right, you're bad and I'm good, I'm woke and you're not. It's how do we free the captives from these lies? So Jesus is having a debate with Pilate on the day of his crucifixion about the truth. Pilate is losing the debate. And that's when he says, oh, what is truth? And washes his hands and kills Jesus. Strong men want to undermine the very idea of the truth. There is no truth. Just believe me. What's at stake is not just fact-checking the lies, but losing the whole idea of the truth. Somebody told me today they're going to the Walter Cronkite School of Communication here. Reminded me, when I was a kid, you know, every night after dinner, we'd take a half hour, only a half hour of news a day. And Walter Cronkite would say, that's the way it is. Now, he never got it all right, particularly black news never got reported. But Cronkite, Brinkley, Huntley, they kind of said what was going on. And Cronkite, this came to me from talking to this young kid, was the most trusted man in America, right? That's the way it is. We have no idea what's the way it is. We live in different universes of facts, ideas. I came out for a pastor's conference in Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. And I said to the sponsors, what do your people think about these things that just happened in Washington? They said, they don't know about it. Never heard about it. Don't talk about it. Parallel universes. I'm more worried about the truth than maybe anything else. Because people just hear what they want to hear. I have a section book called They Listen with Itching Ears. That's in the text. Itching ears to things that just ratify their prejudices. How do we tell the truth? I mean, I know some journalists who really see that as their vocation, and they work hard. Not a lot of them, but some of them do. But I want to say, some of your clergy, we have the vocation also of telling the truth. Truth tellers. What does it mean to love our neighbors when political leaders are making enemies of our neighbors? What does it mean to see the stranger and the hungry and the naked and the sick? It's like, yeah, my wife's a Brit, and when she came here, she couldn't figure out how health care depended on wealth. Culture shock, she couldn't figure it out. Or how mass incarceration, as Brian Stevenson would say, slavery never ended, it just evolved. Now to mass incarceration. What will this election do to that? And my brother Stuart here, we're in something called Face United to Save Democracy. And we're training poll chaplains. We'll recruit you later for that. I call it lawyers and collars. I went to the lawyers and said, you want some collars, some clergy to be alongside you in these perilous polling places? Here's a startling fact. Voter suppression is on in Arizona, right? So I'm the one in these calls, these training pastors, polling calls to do the moral framework. And I always go to one text. First chapter, first book of the Bible. Genesis 1:26. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel surrounded these days by political noise. Do you feel that way sometimes? Pundits, pollsters, attacks, surrounded by noise. And when I do, I go to that text, and it says, then God said, be quiet, noise. Then God said, then what God says is, let us create humankind, that's all of us, in our own image and after our own likeness. That means that any attempt to suppress a vote, corrupt a vote, not count a vote, intimidate a vote on the basis of skin color or anything else is nothing less than an assault on Imago Dei. An assault on the image of God. This is theological, not just political. And then in Matthew 5:8, Jesus says, blessed are the peace lovers. That was it, right? No. Blessed are the peacekeepers who keep a lid on things. No. Blessed are the peacemakers. That means conflict resolvers. We have politics now, politicians who are conflict creators. And Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, the conflict resolvers, for they shall be called the children of God. In our polarized, divided, angry time, what does it mean to be peacemakers? Bring that into the election season. What does that mean? Then there's this Galatians text, 3:28. There is no longer Jew or Gentile, bond or free, male or female, because we are all one in Christ Jesus, it says. Now, we love to quote that text. Here are the most basic pillars of oppression. Always there, race, class, gender, all three, always there. And I learned, Brother Stewart, that this was a baptismal ritual in the early church. Meaning they read this text, Galatians 3:28, at every baptism for a new believer. Baptism is where we go public with our faith. They read this text when they're going public with their faith, and they're saying, in effect, yeah, this leader of ours, this brown-skinned Palestinian rabbi that we follow, this leader of ours says, our job, our mission, is to overcome these divisions. Race, class, gender. This isn't for us extracurricular or a social action committee. This is vocation, mission, calling. And they were saying, in effect, so that's who we are. That's what we do. We overcome these divisions. Now, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. We have to try over again. But we keep at it because that's our mission. That's what he told us to do. And they were saying, in effect, now listen, they're saying, if you don't want to be a part of that kind of group, we're not the group for you. Go somewhere else. Go somewhere else. So I found out that Fisk University has all these, a display of white slaveholder Bibles at Fisk, all these old Bibles. And that Galatians text, 3:28, is taken out of all of them. It's not there. It's not there. So, tonight, we'll talk about whatever you want. I mean, we've got this, what I call the false white gospel. White Christian nationalism is on the ballot this fall. This isn't new. It's very old. It goes back to, some of us know this history, dominionist theology. These white Europeans came here with papal bulls and Puritan preaching, which said this land belonged to white Europeans, theologically. And they could displace and almost destroy an indigenous population. And then they could take a whole African population and cruelly enslave them. And I think one reason we are at such a moment right now is because this nation is closer than it's ever been to multiracial democracy. We've ever been. And if we ever get there, we'll be the first of its kind in the world. And do you think the white supremacists are paying attention to that? This is their last stand. This is their last gasp. This is their last battle where everything is at stake and they'll do anything and everything to end white minority rule. I mean, by 2040, we'll no longer be a white majority nation. We'll be a nation of racial minorities. And they're not ready for that. I mean, my people are not ready for that. At Georgetown, when I'm teaching the founding documents, I teach at the McCourt School of Public Policy, so these are very smart policy students. They're going to go on and be policy makers. And I said, so these documents, I look around and I say, okay, I see a couple of white guys, you guys. Do you own a house? And even that age, most don't. I said, oh, you don't. So the documents that we're studying today were made only for me. I'm an old white guy with a house. It was just for me. None of the rest of you, very diverse classes, none of the rest of you count. What our whole pilgrimage is to make us all count. How do we do that? That's what's at stake right now. This is a moment. In a dinner, I was saying, we're going to be in a time religiously, if it goes one way, of utter resistance for people of faith. Recalling Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the Confessing Church in the 1930s. Or we're going to be in a time of transformation like we have never known before. Eddie Glaude says it like this: everything is falling apart and everything is possible at the same time. Do you hear that? That's the moment we are in. So all I'm saying is, I think there needs to be a faith factor in this election. A faith factor. Not just battlegrounds. Why are there battleground states? This is silly, right? Electoral colleges, battleground states. Most countries, if you win the most votes, you win the election. Not so much here. So how do we talk about moving into resistance or transformation? Now, after dinner, we had a very frank talk about Arizona. We did, right? And a lot of stuff doesn't look so good. Not just the heat, but the divisions, the silos. It was an honest talk. And it reminded me, and I'll close with this, and then we can have a conversation. Close with this. This new chair at Georgetown is blessed for me because it's named after one of my tutors, mentors, and friends. It's called the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Chair of Faith and Justice at Georgetown. And he taught me the difference between hope and optimism. And at the end of a conversation like this, the issue of hope comes up again and again and again. Are you hopeful? Where do we find hope? And he taught me that optimism is a feeling or a mood or even a personality type, cup half empty, cup half full. But he said, no. Faith is, or hope is not a mood, it's a decision you make because of this thing that we call faith. Hebrews says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Now, my best paraphrase of that is, hope means believing in spite of the evidence and then watching the evidence change. So let me tell you quickly, my first day ever in South Africa a long time ago to build bridges between the American churches and the South African churches. I was snuck in the country, and I had to go to St. George's Cathedral, Episcopal Cathedral, smaller than this one, to meet with Desmond Tutu. And I got there, and the place was surrounded by military police. Hundreds, automatic weapons, shields, surrounding the place. They were all over. I had to sneak around and get inside. And there he was. A rally had been postponed. So he says, let's have church. And so he was starting church. But the front doors to the cathedral were broken open, and in poured the South African security police. These guys are thugs. They lined the walls of his cathedral, and they had tape recorders and notepads in their hands, as if to say, go ahead, be prophetic. People, you just got out of prison, go ahead, we'll put you back. And so he just stopped, Bishop Tutu stopped speaking, and he bowed his head. We were surrounded on the inside and the outside. What's he going to say? What's he going to do? Little man, long flowing robe, looking like Yoda. Finally, he looked up and smiled that amazing Desmond Tutu signature smile. And he said, he pointed at them, you are powerful, very powerful, but you're not gods. And I serve a God who will not be mocked. Then he said this. He began first bouncing like a good black Baptist preacher. So he said, now remember, we're surrounded inside and outside. Since you've already lost, we invite you today to come and join the winning side. Young people leapt out of their seats, danced out of the cathedral. We followed them out, and the soldiers didn't know what to do with dancing worshipers who weren't afraid. 10 years later, I was blessed to be at the inauguration of Nelson Mandela. Guess who was master of ceremonies? Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So, Bishop, do you remember St. George's? What happened, what you said? He smiled. He remembered. And there we were, 150,000 of us, tears running down our faces. Nelson Mandela announcing the birth of a new democracy. This was the party, the celebration, the joy. We were filled with it. And I realized that people of faith are less needed at the party. We're needed back there at St. George's, when you can only see the party through the eyes of faith. And what he taught me was our trajectory, people of faith, is faith, prompting hope, leading to action, and making change. Faith, hope, action, and change. We feel surrounded now by a crisis, by a moment. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're the ones who can see, as he did, the party through the eyes of it. No matter what happens, he didn't know how or when or what the cost would be or whether he'd even see it. But in a time like this, a moment like this, we have to be the ones who really can see the party through the eyes of faith. So when you get surrounded and feel surrounded in Arizona, in the weeks coming up, because you're going to feel that way, when you feel so surrounded and don't know what to do, just let Desmond Tutu whisper in your ear, remember, we're on the winning side. Amen. Let's have a conversation.
Sorry. Operator error. So we're being joined tonight by Dr. Warren Stewart from First Institutional Baptist Church, who is a good old friend of Reverend Jim and a newer friend of mine. And why don't you start by sharing us what is it that you're doing at these polls? And how can we help?
Well, we are part of Faith United to Save Democracy, as we already heard from Jim, and we are a nonpartisan group, and we're focusing on the swing states around the nation, and our goal is, it's a fourfold goal: voter registration, voter motivation, voter education, and voter protection. Where the poll chaplains come in is that we feel that a spiritual presence at the polls where people go to vote, where they might be intimidated by people carrying guns, people saying things that are not so socially acceptable, or putting fear in people, or just might need to know, how do I get to the poll? How do I get inside? Where do I need to park, etc. That poll chaplains provide a sense of assurance and hope that you're in the right place, you're doing the right thing to come to vote, and we're here to help you. And we're here because we are people of faith and we're people of hope. And so we are recruiting tonight. If there are any of you out there who would like to join us, there are selected polls in Arizona where there has been challenges. There have been challenges. And so if you're interested, you can go to turnoutsunday.com, www.turnoutsunday.com, or you can see me, and we will get you trained and ready to be there. It's a wonderful experience, and many of us have done that. And I'm here also representing the AACCC. Pastor Barnwell is here, and we represent about 120 some predominantly African-American congregations all over the valley, and we are about Jesus and justice. And so that's what we're here for.
Yeah. So what do you want to talk about? You know.
What do you want to talk about?
Yeah.
This Jesus and justice.
All right, we've got a microphone coming out for people, and Laurel is going to go be our helper. We've got one in the center aisle. There we go. This is where we get our steps in.
Yes. Is this one working? Yep.
Thank you so much for the beautiful message, and I couldn't agree more with your thoughts on who is our neighbor and that being the central question. I think one of the things we need to remember too, though, is that in our country, one of the reasons I think for the rise of, whatever you want to call it, white nationalism or anti-immigration, is because I think, we who live in these areas have somewhat over the decades started to kind of ignore our neighbors in the rural areas. And I think one of the things that we need to do as a country, and I'm speaking more politically here than religiously, I guess, but is figure out how we can help our neighbors who are here in those areas to better their lives so they don't get into these situations where they're angry and they're, because that can cloud their feelings towards their neighbors, and so I just think that is something that we need to remember, that we have a lot of neighbors here out in the rural areas who are really struggling because we just don't think about them and do enough for those areas. I don't know about Arizona so much, but I know in areas where like J.D. Vance comes from, and and those used to be Democratic areas, if I can be political, but they're not anymore. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I'd like to hear our Arizona church leaders speak to that, because the divisions now are not north and south so much as urban and rural.
Yeah, I mean, so we have lots of rural churches in the diocese. So I was in, I get to go spend time there in a way I never had before I moved to Arizona, right? You get elected Bishop of Arizona, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a second. So we've got 22 mission churches, about 10 of whom are in rural places or old mining towns. I would say, yes. And so who my neighbor is and who the Samaritan is to me can be challenging, because sometimes I drove to Lake Havasu and back this weekend. The Samaritans for me are a lot of the people in between here in Lake Havasu and on my drive. And I get to be challenged by that, because how do I love the neighbor who maybe not just doesn't love me, but wishes me harm, and wishes those that I love harm? And yet how do I witness the gospel in that place? And we do it by continuing to support our churches in our rural communities, which in our case is often the only welcoming and affirming LGBTQ place in that community. And so we've got to keep there, and we're not leaving. An arsonist burned down our church in Douglas because he didn't like women leaders and gay leaders. We're building it back. We're not going to abandon Douglas because someone hated us. But we're also going to build that church for the next century, not the last century, because we want it to serve the people of Douglas now, who are a fascinating group of people and are beloved of God, and who are curious about us northern people, but who we're in relationship with. But it takes effort to commit to those relationships across all the distances.
Yeah, the challenge I think we have in Arizona, once you leave the Phoenix metro area, the Tucson area, and even Flagstaff, it is predominantly white. And you have a lot of ignorance. And I don't say that in a belittling way, but in the literal way that people are not around people of color a lot. So there is ignorance, and with ignorance there comes fear. And so a lot of what we're hearing from the right is fear. They don't have hope. They don't feel that they're winning. And rather than join in the winning team and let's work together and make this a better Arizona, we're going to circle the wagons. And we're going to take back what is ours. That right there is ignorant. It's not yours. And so I think that's what we're facing.
What we are missing, let's speak theologically in a cathedral, we're missing a theology of proximity. We're not proximate to each other. That's not accidental. When my dad came home from World War II in the Pacific, he got what all the GIs like him got, an FHA loan for our first family house, and a GI Bill, free education. When you give people housing and education, you make them middle class. My government made us middle class in the biggest affirmative action program in the history of the country. No black sailors on his ship. Got an FHA loan or a GI Bill. No black GIs, which it was a structural policy, a racialized geographical decision, which made my neighborhood all white, my school all white, and my church all white. Wasn't accidental. Because when human beings, on the immigration question, I've seen people from conservative places and cultures, and when they finally encounter that immigrant family personally and see their kids and hear their stories, it changes their stereotypes, their ignorance, right? But this society wants to prevent us from proximity.
Well, and
That's
wants to
what changed.
quiet down the story. We don't want to tell the story of the GI Bill and how it was racialized. We don't want to hear the story of Phoenix Indian School, which is a mile away from here and was the second largest Indian boarding school in the country. Because those stories, we realize we don't look so good in those stories, do we? You and me, and my ancestors. So we've hushed the stories, and only now, for the boarding schools often, are letting them out so that we can do justice and hear and look for reconciliation and repentance and restoration.
The part of my bio that you left off was
Oh, I'm sorry.
a Little League baseball coach.
I did left that off. I'm so sorry.
For 22 seasons. Right?
Yeah.
So when my kids got to be 10, 11, 12, we began to talk as kids about all this stuff. And with permission of the black players and their parents, I said to my white players, you know, your black teammates and classmates here in the dugout have this talk that their mom and dad gives them, how to behave in the presence of the police, what to do with your hands, eye contact.
Sure.
And I shared, say what your dad told you to your white teammates. And they told about the talk.
Sure.
Everybody who's black in here knows about the talk.
That's right.
Everyone. And when my white kids, players, heard about the talk, unlike some of the parents' rights group, they didn't feel like, oh, I'm guilty. I'm responsible. Oh no, I feel terrible now. I feel uncomfortable. They're pissed off
Yeah.
at what's happening to their teammates and classmates.
Sure.
So this whole thing, this cover-up, is my kids at least, when they heard about it, they started biking down to Black Lives Matter Plaza
Sure.
in D.C. And talking to people. And as I got older, talking about what their majors in college were going to be and how they're going to change this. So we have candidates who are masters of grievance, evoking grievance. Every nation has its better angels and worst demons. And our worst demons of race run very deep. And we have now candidates who are evoking and manipulating our worst demons in this country. So this is a battle between better angels
Sure.
and worst demons. And truth-telling is just essential to that.
Do you think we believe in forgiveness as a culture?
Well,
Sorry, big question, but
yeah,
I've got Jim Wallis here.
there's a, we shouldn't mention candidates, but there's a group called Evangelicals for Harris.
Right.
And they had 200,000 people on their first call. And they put this ad out of Billy Graham,
Yeah, I saw it.
Billy Graham, saying, we've all sinned.
Yeah.
And God can offer us forgiveness if we just ask for forgiveness. And then it flashed to an interview with a reporter and Donald Trump, asking him your question. Have you ever asked forgiveness?
Right. Right.
He said, I've never felt the need to do that. Now, Franklin Graham wasn't happy with his dad's
No,
stuff
he
being
wasn't.
used.
Yeah.
But forgiveness, these things are crucial, crucial. And how we talk together is so important, how we learn to talk together and forgive each other. And I love Micah's advice. What does the Lord require? Do justice. I'm glad Micah started there. Do justice. But then, love kindness.
Yeah.
And then, boy, it gets worse. Walk humbly.
Yeah.
How do we do justice but be kind?
Yeah.
And how do we do justice and maybe be kind but walk humbly? How many radical activists for social justice. Are we kind and humble?
Yeah, right.
How do we do what Mike is doing there and talk across these boundaries? That's going to be a task, not just for the next 2 months, but for the long term in this country. And where do we find the proximity to each other to talk about forgiveness?
So I have a question for you, Jim. When Jesus launched his ministry, according to Luke's gospel, he quoted Isaiah.
Yeah.
Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, anointed me to preach good news to the poor, set at liberty those who are oppressed, recover of sight to the blind, etc. I call that Jesus' platform for mission and ministry.
Right.
I mean, that is all about holistic Christianity. It's about Jesus and justice, right relationships with God, oneself, and with all others.
Right.
How can those on the right, how do they deal with that
text.
and dismiss
Yeah.
and call those of us who believe in social justice Marxists? And, how do they dismiss when Jesus launched his ministry and quoted Isaiah?
Well, this was, I call, his Nazareth manifesto.
Yeah.
It was his first gig,
Yes, without a doubt.
and he quotes Isaiah.
Yes,
Now let's get into that text.
yes.
Anointed to bring good news to the poor. The word for good news there in the text is evangel.
Yeah.
Evangel.
Yeah.
From where we get the words
Yeah.
evangelical
Yeah.
and evangelism, right? So I can, because of that text, walk into an evangelical church and say, all right, here's the text. Jesus' opening statement. From the text, I can say, and let's discuss this together, how any gospel, no matter what else it does, even if it gets you out of your alcoholism and saves your marriage or whatever, all that's good stuff. Any gospel from that text that isn't good news to poor people is not the gospel of Jesus Christ, period. Period. And that's a text that can't be denied. So when you raise Jesus' opening, that's his opening press conference.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, I sharing at dinner for this book I'm doing podcasts with the new evangelicals, the post-evangelicals, the ex-evangelicals. I'm waiting for the adjacent evangelicals. and they're all struggling because of texts like that.
Right.
And the culture around them, capital E evangelical, is contrary to Jesus' opening word. The president of an evangelical seminary, one of the biggest ones, we're having lunch one day and he said, I have the most abusive job in the world. I said, what do you mean? Well, evangelicalism is destroying the evangel.
Good news.
Right? So I want to bring those folks back to the evangel, back to the text. And all these new adjacent posts, these folks struggle. I talked this afternoon with one of those people in your town.
Sure.
You
Right.
know.
Right.
And I want to go back, as Michael Curry keeps telling me, the text, the text, the text. Go back to the text. Because I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything, and I don't want to say I'm always right and they're always wrong. I don't. And the older I get, I realize that. Right? However, it's the text. What the gospel, you and I were talking about this afternoon. How do we preach the gospel in a time like this? How do we, those texts, that's the text. I want to have a debate about the text.
What
in
do
those
we
churches.
do, though, because I have heard this. There are some evangelical pastors and leaders who dismiss that text and say it's not appropriate today. How do we deal with that?
Well, I would say your faith isn't appropriate today. I mean, really, there's no concession to be made there. Like, for example, when I went to an evangelical seminary, I was right out of the movement, student movement, where I was secular. I came back to Christ because of Matthew 25, and I went to an evangelical seminary to have an argument with my own tradition. We took a Bible, and an old Bible, and found every text in the Bible about the poor, the oppressed, wealth, poverty, justice, injustice. We found 2,000 verses in the Bible about all that. I don't know how many texts there are about abortion, LGBTQ, but there were 2,000 verses.
Yeah.
And one of my colleagues took an old pair of scissors and cut out of the Bible every single text about justice. Took him a long time. The prophets disappeared. Isaiah, Amos, Malachi. And then the Gospels that were all on the floor. It was all on the floor, and that Bible, I couldn't hold it together in my hands. It was a Bible full of holes.
My Lord.
Instead of a holy Bible.
That'll preach.
And I took that Bible out to preach, and I would say, brothers and sisters, this is white churches.
Yeah.
This is the American Bible. Our Bible is full of holes. From all we have ignored, might as well get the scissors out and start cutting. So it isn't about being a Marxist or whatever. It's about restoring the Word of God.
Yeah.
In
The
our
whole
lives,
Word of God.
our communities, our neighborhoods, and our churches. And, there'll always be people who are privileged who will want to dismiss all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are always going to be people who, when they hear the gospel, when they hear it, it's gonna be heard. So go to the text, preach the text.
Yeah.
I want to debate the text.
Sure.
In those, I'd like to see churches in Arizona this fall, the next few weeks, have conversations. You're doing some of this between churches. About these texts.
Sure.
What does it mean? What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? What does that mean when people are making enemies of neighbors as a political strategy?
Sure.
They have a trajectory of fear that leads to hate, that leads to violence. That's their trajectory. How do we, in the middle of that, say, wait a minute, where's our neighbor here? Let's have that theological discussion in places where people think they're theological.
Would you share some of the negative responses? I'm sure you had at least one or two.
One or two, yeah.
To your book which begins with the title, The False White Gospel. What's been some of the negative responses?
I've had some black political leaders who say, thanks so much for writing this book, but I couldn't endorse it because it'll kill me in my state. And I've had people say, what do you mean false white gospel?
Yeah, yeah.
And then I talk about this whole history of the doctrine of discovery, which we started with. The justification of slavery, which American slavery, there was always slavery in the world. You lost a war, you were slaves for a while. But ours was unique, and the British unique. Racial hierarchy was built in to our slavery, and that's why it continues this very day. And what I find is people they want to dismiss it. The ones who want to dismiss it don't want to have an honest historical conversation. But if we have that conversation, it gets pretty obvious pretty fast. I mean, there are people on the left, friends of mine, who say the answer to bad religion is no religion. And there are honestly days I feel that too.
Yeah.
But I think the answer to bad religion is better faith, true faith. And so how do we name bad religion and then talk about what faith means? Dr. King put it so, I believe in the separation of church and state, for the record, I believe in that. That does not require the segregation of moral and religious values from public life.
Right, right.
And Dr. King said this, the church is not the master of the state, Christian nationalism, nor are we the servant of the state, cleaning up the mess, pulling bodies out of the river,
Sure.
and not sending anybody upstream to see what or who's throwing them in.
Right.
Not the master, not the servant, we are the conscience of the
That's
state.
it. Yeah.
You know? So I'm happy to have that conversation. What I find is that most of the people on the right, they don't want to have the conversation. They won't debate. I wish Franklin Graham would have a debate with me. I really wish.
Yeah.
Bless his heart. But they won't. They won't. So the more we can talk about the text and talk about faith, then the people who are honest enough to take a look at the scripture and our history, there are people who really want to know what's true.
Yeah.
And so I spend less time worrying about what the other side says about me, but what some of their children take me aside. Some of the children of the leaders of the religious right in this country have privately taken me aside to talk about faith, because they think the faith that they're raised with is illegitimate. And they're trying to find their way back to faith. And some of them are the kids of these same leaders.
We've got one
The
more
audience?
question, and then we're probably going to have to wrap up. But so,
Okay. Do we have any more questions? You, sir?
I'm happy to take maybe
a couple more. All right.
two or three, all at once, and then we'll respond to. But here's the trick. Try to make a question in the form of a question. It's tough.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anyone else have a question in the form of a question?
All right. I see one in the back.
Yes.
One here.
One there.
Getting my steps in
We'll hear them, and
today.
then we'll try to respond.
Thank you for taking the question. The question I have is in regards to what you identified as Christian nationalism being on the ballot. With that being said that way, it can pose or is it posing a challenge with identifying what that means? When I look at the number of the polls, and there are this race being so tight, it says that we are a Christian nationalism nation. How do we articulate that in a way that says this is not really about Christian as much as it is nationalism?
Yeah, as I said before, the name spells the problem.
Yeah.
You know, it is a nationalist agenda. Somebody sent me a copy of the Trump Bible.
Trump Bible.
Trump Bible,
Special gift.
as a gift, right? And on the outside it says, "God bless the USA." On the cover, and then inside it's got all of our founding documents, right after the scriptures. And what's clear as I looked at that, if the person who put it out and is making all the money from it were ever to read it, that is literally, theologically, an idolatry. The worship of the American nation is an idol. It's an idol. That's theologically clear.
Bless you.
So we should use that kind of language. Or to use religion to bless hate, says Gary Wills, the great historian, is the ultimate heresy. It's a heresy. And so I want to use theological language and not just say, I disagree, or I have a different point of view, let's compromise someplace. Things that are idolatrous. I'll be blunt. In the phrase white evangelical, even white Christian, the operative term in the phrase white evangelical isn't evangelical, it's white. The one term defines the other. American Christianity is an idolatry. There is no American Christianity.
That's it.
The body of Christ globally is the most diverse human community on the planet. Because they don't put their nations first. None of them have flags in their churches. Sorry, I didn't look around.
We don't, not in this one.
Okay.
Most of them.
So this is where the captivity comes in, because a lot of those folks, they wouldn't say, I'm a white Christian nationalist. They wouldn't say that. Most wouldn't say that. They might even not know what the term means. But they're operative within that framework. And so to set them free, and you know, for a lot of white folks, it's like, we're all against white supremacy. You know, that phrase, easy to dismiss. It's this idol of the normativeness of whiteness, the assumption of whiteness, the core of whiteness in everything. So when things are white this and white that, we're captive. And so I honestly believe that when white people get set free from the idol of whiteness, they're happier people. You know, after we had the 9/11 thing yesterday, the day before, when my young son was watching TV with me after that, and he says, Dad, listen to what they're saying about Muslims. Mohammed's not like that. What are they talking about? Because Mohammed was in school with him, you know. So I don't want to just attack white people for being white. I want to see them set free from the idolatry of whiteness. So they can be better and happier people and realize that the diversity of this country is the greatest gift this country has. And we have the chance of creating a genuine multiracial democracy. That's extraordinary. And the people who are fighting that are missing the chance to be blessed. To be blessed by what this country has and can become. I'm getting off here, but that's, how do you set people free from that?
There was a question in the back before, or there was somebody with their hand up.
What you have so aptly described as the white gospel, the false white gospel.
I can't hear.
What you have so aptly defined as the false white gospel, what is then the gospel? What is the good news? If you are articulating the false white gospel, what is the good news?
So what is the
How do you
What is the
articulate
gospel?
the false white gospel?
You know, an elder in my evangelical church took me aside after he realized I kept going into the city and going to black churches and going to work alongside young men in the city who were same as me, but they were black and I was white. And they had all different life stories. He said, son, you have to understand that Christianity, I'll remember this quote forever, Christianity has nothing to do with racism. That's political, and our faith is personal. That's what he said. That's the night that I left.
Yeah.
My childhood faith. This thing that was turning me upside down, tearing me apart, if that had nothing to do with my faith, why would I want anything to do with my faith? So I just became a secular activist. I didn't have words to go around that at the time. When I came back to faith, these are the words I found. God is personal, but never private.
Right.
If our faith isn't personal, God is personal, but never private. If Jesus came to save us so we could help bring his kingdom into the world.
Yeah.
Every time we pray the Lord's Prayer, on earth
As it is in heaven.
As it is in
as
heaven.
it is in heaven. So we've got to be changed, converted, forgiven, so we can be followers. They didn't call themselves Christians for a long time. They were the people of the way. The way of, they were, and a lot of young people I know still won't say they're Christian, but they do want to be followers of Jesus. So if it isn't personal, here's the thing. Jesus knows everything about everyone in this room and loves us anyway. If we don't know that kind of, if that's not personal, what's the point?
Yeah.
Do we just, at the pulpit, just do papers on issues every Sunday? No, we talk about the gospel. But the gospel is to save us in order that we can help to bring this new order into the world.
Yeah.
So, for me, to privatize this is the ultimate heresy of American religion. To privatize the gospel. And it's white Christians who do that because to privatize it maintains our privilege in a system that we don't want to be examined, right? So my gospel is personal and social. And it wants to change me, and it wants to change the world. Through people like us, wants to change the world.
Question there? Do you want to take another question or two? We can do one more.
Okay. Last question.
Uno más.
I just want to speak about, you talked about the Christian nationalists, and you've said the white Christian nationalists. And I want to say, aren't there hidden Christian nationalists? Because there are many, it's the Christian nationalist is the thing. And must be black Christian nationalists and Indian Christian nationalists and Hispanic Christian nationalists. And I mean, aren't those kind of the hidden ones that maybe you don't suspect that are there, that are around also?
Yeah, the worship of the nation is, there are people of color who buy into that too.
Right, right.
But I'm saying historically, Christian nationalism has white supremacy embedded in it from the beginning. But people buy into that and worship the nation is an idol. And then the history of it is embedded from the beginning, was that white supremacy. Well, I just am grateful for this conversation. And since you're in play in Arizona, make sure you put faith in play as well.
Thank you so much for being here. If you want to join us in the Olney Gallery, Jim will be there to sign books, and there's cookies and lemonade. Ooh. So, you know, you get a reward. So, thank you.